This morning, we learned of yet another act of Russian terror in the form of a barrage of drones and missiles raining down on Kyiv. The United States Congress has led the world in supporting the Ukraine war effort.
And the United States, the light of the world for democracy, needs to be there and needs to support the Ukrainian people against these atrocities.
The EU, for the first time, is paying for offensive weapons to be sent into Ukraine. Germany has reversed course, is cutting off the Nord Stream 2 pipeline that Russia was counting on for future revenue, and is sending offensive military weapons into Ukraine. And I serve on the Appropriations Committee. We're going to provide billions more in assistance, both for refugees and for the Ukrainian resistance.
Instead, he and Vice President Vance spent Friday's photo op at the White House publicly scolding Ukraine's President Zelensky, telling him to say thank you, which he has said repeatedly, and accusing him of being disrespectful.
And do you think that it's respectful to come to the Oval Office of the United States of America and attack the administration that is trying to prevent the destruction of your country?
Millions of people. You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III. And what you're doing is very disrespectful to the country, this country, that's back to you, far more than a lot of people said.
Something doesn't add up. For 2 years, the US has flooded Ukraine with weapons, money and unwavering support. Officials swore that they would stand with Kiev for as long as it takes, but now something strange is happening. Washington is talking about ceasefire, berating Zelensky in public, aid is slowing down, and the sense that Europe is being left out to dry. Why? What changed? And perhaps most importantly, what was this war really about in the first place? To answer that, we need to step back, not just to 2022, when Russian tanks rolled across the border, but to 2014, when the first domino fell. Because only by piecing together the events leading up to this war can we begin to understand what's happening now and what's coming next. It started with a decision. In late 2013, Ukraine's President Viktor Yanukovych was preparing to sign a trade deal with the European Union, but at the last moment he backed out. Instead, he chose a close economic alliance with Russia. That single decision sparked mass protests, and those protests quickly spiraled into something much bigger.
This was one of the most horrific days of Ukraine's anti-government protests.
Furious over the government's refusal to sign a trade agreement with the European Union. Police used tear gas and clubs to beat back demonstrators who surrounded President Viktor Yanukovych's office.
Ukraine's anti-government protesters are now in control of Kiev and celebrating victory.
Within months, Yanukovych was gone, forced out of office, but this wasn't just an organic uprising, it was something more. Leaked conversations later revealed US officials handpicking Ukraine's new leadership before the government had even fallen.
In early February of 2014, as the Maidan crisis was getting more violent, there was a phone call that was intercepted. It was a call between the Assistant Secretary of State for European Affairs, Victoria Nuland, and the US Ambassador to Ukraine, Jeffrey Pyatt.
I think Yats is the guy who's got the economic experience, the governing experience. He's the guy, you know, what he needs is Klitsch and Tony Book on the outside. I just think Klitsch going in, he's going to be at that level working for Yatsenyuk. It's just not going to work.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. Okay. Good. Well, do you want us to try to set up a call with him as the next step?
Sullivan's come back to me VFR saying you need Biden, and I said probably tomorrow for an attaboy and to get the deets to stick. So okay. Biden's willing.
So you had this remarkable phone call where you have these two senior officials of the U.S. government apparently talking about a coup, or how they were planning to restructure the government of Ukraine.
Fuck the EU.
No, exactly.
So why was Washington so invested in Ukraine's future? The official story was about democracy and freedom, but there's another layer, one that had to do with NATO and NATO's expansion. For years, US officials had quietly admitted that NATO expansion was a red line for Russia. After the Cold War, Moscow had been given assurances that the alliance would not move eastward. But those promises were quickly broken. One by one, former Soviet states joined NATO, and after 2014 coup, Ukraine suddenly became a key piece of that puzzle.
I would like some certainty for Ukraine. If we are talking about NATO and the membership action plan, I would really like to get from Biden specifics, yes or no.
Washington never openly said Ukraine would join NATO. Instead, it kept things vague. Hint statements about Ukraine's right to choose its alliances, military training programs, and arms shipments. To Russia, it looked like something else entirely, a slow, deliberate march towards a NATO-aligned Ukraine on its border. Moscow warned over and over that this would be unacceptable, but Washington didn't listen, and in 2022, after 8 years of rising tensions, Putin finally acted.
Especially in the last several hours, Russia has invaded Ukraine, advancing on this country in several directions.
Air raid sirens blared out across the capital. Helicopter gunships hovering above a power plant. Other power stations were targeted as well.
But here's where the story takes a turn, because while the war seemed to catch the world by surprise, for some it was exactly what America had been waiting for. Before the war, Europe was economically intertwined with Russia, especially through energy. Cheap Russian gas fueled Germany's industry and kept energy prices low across the EU. But for Washington, that was a problem. Europe was supposed to be America's ally, but it was growing too dependent upon Moscow. That's why Washington saw an opportunity in this war to break the relationships once and for all. And then in September 2022, something happened. The Nord Stream pipeline was sabotaged.
Powerful explosions damaged the 2 Nord Stream gas pipelines. That was according to Danish police on Tuesday.
Who did it? Officially, no one knows, but investigative reports suggest a likely suspect, and it wasn't Russia.
A new revelation broke this week about what caused last year's explosion of Nord Stream gas pipelines in the Baltic Sea. Investigative journalist Seymour Hersh alleges the U.S. is behind the attacks. Writing in a Substack, the White House ordered the strike as part of a covert operation carried out under NATO training exercises last summer.
The pipeline's destruction forced Europe to turn away from Russian energy and buy expensive American liquefied natural gas instead, exactly what Washington wanted. So while the Russia-Ukrainian war continued, Europe suffered. Energy prices soared, industry struggled, and the continent became even more dependent on the US. The plan had worked, but only halfway. Russia itself wasn't broken. From the moment the war began, the response was immediate. The US and its allies imposed the harshest sanctions ever placed on a major economy. Russia was to be cut off, isolated, drained of resources. The strategy was clear: suffocate Moscow's economy, weaken Putin's grip on power, and force a retreat.
We're implementing full blocking sanctions on 2 large Russian financial institutions.
Tonight, Russia is feeling the shock of Western sanctions.
They will hit the Russian economy hard.
Waging economic war on Russia on a scale that would have been unimaginable just a year ago.
At first, it seemed like a death blow. Russia's currency crashed, Western companies fled. The expectation was that within months, Russia's economy would crumble under the weight of such sanctions. But then something unexpected happened.
The ruble is down, but it appears to be generally stable. GDP is back to its pre-war levels. And just this week, inflation, the latest concern, it also appears to be stabilizing. Russia is now transforming into a wartime economy.
Instead of collapsing, Russia adapted. It rerouted trade to China, India, and the global south. It built new financial networks, found alternative supply chains, and even saw its energy exports surge. The very sanctions meant to cripple Russia had instead forced it to become more self-sufficient. And as for Putin, far from being weakened, he emerged stronger. The war had solidified his grip on power, not threatened it. The US had miscalculated. The war didn't break Russia, it transformed it, and that had consequences that Washington hadn't planned for. While the US was focused on Ukraine, China was expanding its influence. Trade deals, infrastructure projects, military buildup. Beijing was rising fast, challenging US dominance not just in Asia but globally.
携手努力让各国互联互通更加有效。
The most expensive infrastructure project in history.
The Belt and Road Initiative, a boom, a bust, or just a buzzword?
It is also a way through which China confirms its role as a global power.
The U.S. and other Western countries are worried and recently announced their own plan.
And here's where things get complicated. Washington views China as a far bigger threat than Russia. China is the world's second largest economy, a tech superpower, and a backbone of global manufacturing. Russia is a regional power, but not an existential threat to American dominance.
The Chinese believe that the United States are a great power in inevitable decline, and that they are an inevitable rise.
The biggest threat we face as a country from a counterintelligence perspective is from the People's Republic of China, and especially the Chinese Communist Party.
Senator John McCain, who said that Russia really is just a gas station masquerading as a country. Yes. So, you know, you don't need to take that literally, but I think any sane person would look at China's economy, look at the trajectory of their rise, and understand that China actually poses a much more serious long-term strategic threat to America's place in the world.
Suddenly, Ukraine was no longer a priority. It had succeeded in splitting European trade with Russia, but the ultimate aim of crippling Russia had failed to materialize. So the failure of America to cripple Russia, as well as America seeing its US debt rising, and also seeing China's rise, has meant the need to change strategy. If the US wants to contain China, it can't stay bogged down in Ukraine. Washington needs to free up its resources. That means ending or at least freezing the war. We've already seen the signs. Military aid in Ukraine is slowing. American officials, particularly Trump, are demanding Zelensky to negotiate a ceasefire. And America is also demanding payback for the money it's given to Ukraine in the form of a $500 billion rare earth deal.
Biden, very, very foolishly, stupidly, frankly, gave $300 billion and $350 billion more accurately to a country to fight and to try and do things. And you know what happened? We get nothing. We get nothing. Just gave it. We could have rebuilt our entire U.S. Navy with $350 billion. Think of it, $350 billion. We could have rebuilt our U.S. Navy. So he gave it away as fast as the money could be gone. And what we're doing is getting that all back, and a lot more than that. And
the US thought it could break Russia. Instead, it pushed Russia closer to China. And that's a problem, because a strong Russia-China alliance is Washington's worst nightmare. If those two countries stand together, the US can't isolate Beijing. So what's the solution? Cut a deal. Give Russia what it wants, or at least something of what it wants, Ukraine, or at least part of it, in exchange for breaking its ties with China. If this happens, it would be the ultimate betrayal of Ukraine. Ukraine is now realizing it was never a partner or ally for America, but a strategic asset that has been sacrificed for a bigger geopolitical game for America. This was never just about Ukraine. It was part of a much larger geopolitical strategy, one designed to weaken Russia, break Europe's economic ties with Moscow, and reinforce American dominance. But something unexpected happened. Russia didn't collapse. The strategy failed, at least in that part. And now with China rising, the US is shifting focus, even if it means leaving Ukraine behind, or worse, trading it to Russia in exchange for Moscow's support against Beijing. Inshallah, if you like this video, please like, share, and subscribe to our video. Jazakallah khair.